The day the will was read, the room fell into stunned silence. Gasps echoed through the grand plantation hall as the lawyer's voice trembled slightly while pronouncing words that would shock an entire county. Everything, the land, the mansions, the livestock, and all the accumulated wealth of one of the South's most prominent plantation owners was left not to his family, not to his beloved wife, but to the man who had served him faithfully for decades. In an era where society was rigidly divided by race and status, where a black slave's value was measured only by labor and obedience, such a declaration was unthinkable, scandalous, and incendiary. Whispers erupted immediately. Eyes narrowed, hearts raced. Some were in disbelief, others in fury. The world had been turned upside down, and no one could deny the quiet cunning and moral complexity that had orchestrated this final act of justice. From the moment he inherited the sprawling estate as a young man, the plantation owner had been aware of the precarious balance between loyalty, power, and wealth. He had observed the cruelty and selfishness of the world around him, the constant plotting of relatives eager to secure inheritance, and the opportunistic flattery of neighbors seeking to ingratiate themselves with his growing fortune. Yet through all this, one figure stood unwavering beside him, his most trusted slave, a man of intelligence, discretion, and remarkable judgment. Unlike the countless others whose lives were expendable in the eyes of society, this man carried not only the weight of daily labor, but the silent burden of trust, of being privy to the owner's deepest fears, ambitions, and secrets. While the wife, with her expectations of status and control, demanded recognition and influence, the loyal slave quietly observed, anticipated, and endured, forming a bond with the master that transcended the rigid barriers of race and social convention. It was a bond forged not through words but through action, reliability, and an understanding that transcended societal hierarchy. The slave managed accounts, supervised fields, and even mediated disputes among the workers, earning a reputation for wisdom and fairness. Day after day, season after season, he navigated the brutal and complex plantation life, making decisions that preserved and expanded his master's wealth, yet never stepping beyond the invisible lines drawn by a society steeped in prejudice. Every gesture, every quiet counsel, every calculated act of prudence contributed to the invisible scaffolding that supported the plantation's empire. And it was this diligence and loyalty, often unrecognized, that would ultimately be honored in the most extraordinary manner imaginable. The wife, accustomed to entitlement and accustomed to wielding her influence over the household, had assumed her position as the rightful heir to her husband's legacy. She walked the halls with confidence, believing her social station and marital bond guaranteed her inheritance. She saw the slave as nothing more than a servant, a shadow in the background of her life, unaware that in the private chambers of decision her husband had already begun to question the assumptions of entitlement and fairness that governed their world. The decision to bypass her entirely was both a final act of defiance against societal expectation and a deliberate recognition of merit, loyalty, and moral fidelity. When the will was revealed, outrage collided with fascination. The plantation staff, white and black, watched the unfolding drama with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and cautious hope. Families whispered in drawing rooms, neighbors gossiped at church, and lawyers pondered the unprecedented legal implications. How could a black man inherit what decades of societal prejudice had declared impossible? How could a white widow, trained by centuries of expectation, be denied the wealth and security she believed were her birthright? These questions reverberated not only through the halls of the plantation but across the region, igniting conversations about loyalty, justice, and the deeply entrenched rules of inheritance. Yet behind the shock and outrage lay a subtler story, a story of human complexity, of moral calculation, and of the extraordinary courage it takes to defy convention. The plantation owner had lived long enough to see the limitations of society's rules and the injustice embedded in blind privilege. In his final act, he redefined what legacy could mean, challenging the rigid structures of race, class, and expectation. His decision was not impulsive or vengeful, it was deliberate, intelligent, and profoundly ethical in its recognition of true service and loyalty. The estate, the fields, the wealth, and the social power that had long been concentrated in the hands of the elite were now poised to shift in a single act. And in this seismic moment, the plantation, and all who lived within and around it, would witness not merely the redistribution of property, but the awakening of a moral truth that had long been obscured by tradition, prejudice, and greed. In a world built upon assumptions, the extraordinary act of leaving everything to a slave and nothing to a wife would forever be remembered as a story of justice, loyalty, and the audacious courage to defy expectation. The moment the plantation owner finalized his will, he set in motion a chain of events that would reverberate through his family, his community, and the broader society for decades. In a society where rigid hierarchies and racial prejudices dictated every aspect of life, the decision to leave his entire estate, including land, livestock, money, and property, to a black man who had spent his life as a slave was nothing short of revolutionary. This act challenged not only familial expectations, but also the deeply entrenched social norms of the 18th and 19th century South, making it one of the most extraordinary inheritances in history. To understand the gravity of this choice, one must examine the layers of planning, reasoning, and societal defiance that informed it. The plantation owner was a man of acute intelligence and foresight. From early in his adult life, he observed the world around him with a critical eye, understanding that loyalty, morality, and competence were often overlooked in favor of social status and entitlement. He witnessed countless instances in which family members, motivated by greed and vanity, undermined one another and attempted to secure wealth without regard for justice or merit. Similarly, he saw the societal devaluation of black lives as a structural norm. Slaves were property, tools for labor, not individuals capable of understanding, intelligence, or deserving of inheritance. Against this backdrop, the decision to recognize his slave with such a monumental bequest became an act of moral and social defiance. The slave in question had lived a life marked by unwavering loyalty, intelligence, and discretion. Unlike many others who were reduced to mere laborers under oppressive conditions, he demonstrated remarkable capacity for management and judgment. He oversaw day-to-day operations, negotiated with other workers, and even advised the plantation owner on financial and strategic matters. His insight and reliability became indispensable, quietly shaping the prosperity of the estate. Over time, a bond developed between master and servant, one that transcended the rigid structures of race and hierarchy. While this relationship existed within the framework of systemic oppression, it demonstrated that merit, fidelity, and moral character could, at least in private, overcome prejudice. The will itself was a masterpiece of calculated intent. Every asset, from the most fertile fields to the accumulated wealth in hidden ledgers, was explicitly bequeathed to the slave. The documents were drawn to withstand legal challenges, anticipating the outrage of the family and the likely attempts to contest it in court. The plantation owner had thought through every possible loophole, every potential argument, and ensured that the bequest would stand as a legal testament to his judgment. This careful planning reflected his deep understanding not only of law but of human nature. He knew his wife and relatives would react with anger, desperation, and cunning, and he sought to preempt those challenges through meticulous drafting and foresight. The immediate reactions to the will illustrate the seismic impact of this decision. When read aloud, the wife, previously assured of her position as the rightful heir, collapsed into disbelief. Her face, once confident and commanding, now displayed shock, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. Family members gasped and whispered, their own assumptions about entitlement and social hierarchy crumbling in real time. The community, too, buzzed with disbelief. Neighbors, merchants, and local officials could hardly comprehend the idea that a slave, a man considered property in every legal and social sense, was now the sole beneficiary of a vast estate. The scandal was immediate, and gossip spread like wildfire. The social hierarchy had been disrupted, and the precedent was extraordinary. Beyond shock and scandal, the act sent a deeper moral message. The plantation owner's decision reflected a philosophy that true loyalty and service, rather than social position or bloodline, deserved recognition. He had witnessed enough injustice, cruelty, and greed to understand that inheritance often failed to reflect merit or ethical behavior. By rewarding the slave who had proven his trustworthiness, intelligence, and moral clarity, he established a principle that transcended mere wealth distribution. Justice could, and should, acknowledge virtue, even if societal norms resisted it. This moral dimension elevated the will from a legal document to a historical statement of principle. However, the implications of this act extended beyond morality into legal and practical challenges. The family immediately sought to contest the will, arguing on grounds of legality, social expectation, and presumed incapacity of a black man to inherit such property. Lawyers debated the unprecedented nature of the bequest, while the local courts faced the delicate task of interpreting the law in a way that had never been tested. This legal struggle became a public spectacle, a tense drama that attracted attention far beyond the plantation's walls. The will's unusual nature forced society to confront deeply ingrained assumptions about race, class, and entitlement, sparking discussions that would resonate for years. The impact on the beneficiary, the slave, was equally profound. Suddenly thrust into a position of wealth and authority, he had to navigate a society unprepared to accept his newfound status. While the will granted him property, it also brought scrutiny, resentment, and danger. He had to assert control over the estate, manage relationships with skeptical workers, and respond to potential threats from relatives and the local community. His intelligence, resilience, and moral grounding, which had earned him this inheritance, now became essential tools for survival and leadership. Ultimately, the unusual will stands as a testament to the power of foresight, moral courage, and the recognition of merit. It challenges historical assumptions about the rigidity of race and social class in inheritance, and illustrates how one individual's deliberate, principled decision can alter lives and legacies. By leaving everything to his slave and nothing to his wife, the plantation owner not only rewarded loyalty and virtue, but also made a profound statement about justice, fairness, and human recognition. The ripple effects of this act would be felt in legal disputes, societal reactions, and historical memory, cementing its place as one of the most extraordinary and thought-provoking inheritances in history. The reading of the will did not merely surprise the plantation staff and local community. It ignited a storm of betrayal, outrage, and calculated greed within the very family that had expected to inherit everything. The plantation owner's wife, once secure in her presumed position as the primary heir, found herself completely bypassed. Her shock quickly gave way to anger and a sense of personal affront, emotions that would shape her response for years to come. What many in the community perceived as a simple transfer of wealth was, in fact, a direct challenge to centuries of societal norms, a subversion of familial expectation, and a confrontation with human greed at its most raw. The wife's immediate reaction was visceral. In her mind, marriage had secured her position in the estate. She had been the visible partner in public and private life, attending social events, managing household affairs, and participating in the everyday administration of the plantation. She had assumed, as did society at large, that her role as a white woman and spouse entitled her to her husband's fortune. To be disinherited in favor of a man who had been legally considered property was not merely shocking, it was a direct affront to her status, identity, and pride. Her disbelief manifested in tears, accusations, and demands for explanations. But her husband had anticipated her reaction and ensured that the will was legally ironclad, leaving little room for contestation. Family members, too, responded with calculated ambition and simmering resentment. Sons, nephews, and brothers-in-law saw an unexpected obstacle to their own expected inheritance, a disruption that threatened their social and economic standing. Conversations quickly turned to legal strategy. Petitions, appeals, and public pressure became tools for contesting what they perceived as an injustice. Some family members tried to frame the decision as the result of coercion, manipulation, or the master's declining mental capacity, a common tactic used in 18th and 19th century inheritance disputes. Each attempt to discredit the will was fueled not merely by outrage, but by the underlying greed that had long dictated family behavior. The prospect of a black man inheriting the estate was intolerable to those whose lives had been conditioned to expect entitlement over merit. Yet, the plantation owner had been meticulous in anticipating these challenges. The will was constructed to withstand legal scrutiny and to anticipate common avenues of dispute. Every clause, every stipulation, every signature was executed with precision to ensure that familial ambitions could not easily overturn his wishes. This preemptive strategy demonstrates not only his foresight but also his understanding of the human psyche. He knew that betrayal and greed were natural reactions and that legal maneuvering would follow, and he had acted to counter these potential obstacles in advance. In doing so, he transformed a simple bequest into a deliberate act of justice, moral reckoning, and historical defiance. The dynamics of betrayal extended beyond the legal realm. Socially, the wife and family found themselves facing ostracism, ridicule, and whispered judgment from neighbors who were both shocked and intrigued by the unprecedented inheritance. Some members of the community sided quietly with the disinherited family, seeing the will as a moral outrage and an affront to natural order. Others sympathized with the beneficiary, admiring the plantation owner's recognition of loyalty and integrity. The tension between public perception and private ambition created a complex web of social pressures, further intensifying the sense of betrayal felt by the disinherited family members. The psychological dimensions of greed and entitlement are particularly important to understand in this context. The wife's sense of betrayal was not simply financial, it was existential. To be denied the inheritance was to be denied recognition of her role, influence, and life's work within the plantation. Similarly, the extended family felt their expected status, respect, and social position threatened. The shock of the will revealed how closely human perception of value, love, and duty is intertwined with material wealth, and how easily greed can distort familial relationships. In essence, the plantation owner had exposed the raw underbelly of human ambition, revealing the lengths to which people would go to reclaim perceived entitlement. At the same time, this period of familial betrayal set the stage for an enduring historical lesson. The will became a case study in how loyalty, morality, and merit could, in rare circumstances, outweigh social convention, race, and bloodline. While the wife and family were consumed by outrage, the beneficiary, an individual previously considered property, was elevated to a position of recognition and power. The contrast between the morally guided reward and the reactionary greed of the disinherited highlights a profound ethical dimension. True loyalty and virtue, even when marginalized, deserve acknowledgement, while entitlement and selfishness are exposed for what they are. Legal challenges continued for years, creating tension and drama that captured local attention. Lawyers debated precedent, neighbors whispered about potential outcomes, and the courts were forced to consider the implications of a black man inheriting what had long been reserved for white family members. Each day that the will stood unchallenged reinforced the plantation owner's vision and moral clarity. Meanwhile, the wife and family grappled with the reality of their disinheritance, ultimately forced to confront the consequences of their own expectations and societal assumptions. In the end, Keynote 2 illustrates that betrayal and greed are inseparable from human reaction to unexpected justice. The wife and family's response underscores the social and psychological forces at play, revealing the challenges inherent in defying societal norms. The plantation owner's foresight, moral reasoning, and precise execution ensured that loyalty and merit triumphed over entitlement, leaving a legacy that resonates far beyond the immediate drama of inheritance. It is a story not only of shock and scandal, but of enduring ethical clarity, showing how courage and justice can withstand even the fiercest tides of human greed. In a society rigidly structured by race, class, and entrenched notions of property, loyalty was rarely rewarded beyond the limits of servitude. Slaves were expected to perform labor without recognition, their humanity often denied by law, social norms, and custom. Yet in this story, the plantation owner's decision to leave everything to his loyal slave challenged centuries of social and legal assumptions, making the act both extraordinary and revolutionary. The reward of such loyalty not only elevated the slave into wealth and influence, but also symbolically redefined the boundaries of recognition, morality, and justice. In a society unaccustomed to valuing virtue in someone deemed property, the slave's loyalty was not superficial or performative. It had been cultivated over decades through unwavering dedication, intelligence, and prudence. From managing the daily operations of the plantation to mediating disputes among workers, the slave had become indispensable to the estate's success. His insight into agricultural practices, financial management, and interpersonal dynamics allowed the plantation to flourish. And yet, All this competence existed in a world that systematically refused to acknowledge his full personhood. While others may have taken credit for his work, exploited his skills, or dismissed his ideas, the master recognized the depth and significance of his contributions. Loyalty in this context was more than mere obedience. It was the consistent demonstration of wisdom, reliability, and moral discernment in the face of systemic oppression. The plantation owner's reward, enshrined in his will, was thus a radical acknowledgment of this loyalty. By transferring full ownership of his wealth to the slave, he elevated him beyond the artificial boundaries imposed by race and societal expectation. This act was unprecedented. Typically, slaves were bought, sold, or freed in nominal gestures, often leaving them with no lasting security. Rarely did they receive property or wealth sufficient to wield influence in a society structured to deny them autonomy. The inheritance represented not merely a transfer of material assets, but a profound recognition of human value, merit, and moral fortitude. It challenged assumptions that intelligence, loyalty, and virtue could only belong to the privileged. This reward also carried enormous social and psychological implications. The slave, suddenly elevated to a position of wealth and authority, faced both opportunities and challenges. He was now responsible for managing the estate, navigating legal frameworks, and asserting authority over workers and tenants who had previously viewed him as subordinate. The transformation demanded careful negotiation of relationships, strategy, and an understanding of the broader social context in which he now operated. The reward of loyalty was thus inseparable from the burdens it imposed, requiring him to exercise the same prudence, intelligence, and moral judgment that had earned him recognition in the first place. At the same time, the reward became a symbol of hope and aspiration within the enslaved and oppressed communities. Word of the inheritance spread, quietly shared among others who labored under harsh conditions. It demonstrated that steadfast loyalty, integrity, and intelligence could be recognized even in a society designed to suppress agency. The act offered a moral lesson: that virtuous behavior was not meaningless, and that courage, discretion, and commitment could, in rare circumstances, overcome systemic injustice. It was a subtle but profound disruption of social norms, signaling to the oppressed that their humanity and competence had the potential to transcend legal and racial barriers. The reward of loyalty also highlighted the contrast between the slave and the disinherited family. While the wife and relatives relied on entitlement, social position, and expectations rooted in privilege, the slave's elevation was entirely merit-based. His achievements, patience, and fidelity were the reasons for his new status, demonstrating a rare alignment between ethical behavior and material reward. This contrast illuminated the moral core of the story. Loyalty guided by principle and action could achieve recognition where inheritance and entitlement, grounded in greed and assumption, could not. Society had long equated power with birthright. The plantation owner's decision subverted that equation, offering a lesson in the ethics of recognition. The practical impact of the reward extended into governance and estate management. The slave, now responsible for overseeing a vast property, had to navigate new legal and social realities. He had to assert authority in an environment resistant to the idea of a black man wielding wealth and control. Former peers, workers, and even neighbors could challenge his decisions, fueled by prejudice and resentment. Yet the inheritance provided him with not only resources but legitimacy. Backed by the master's foresight and legal documentation, loyalty, in this case, was not merely acknowledged. It was empowered, granting agency and the means to shape his own destiny within a hostile society. Moreover, the reward served as a historical testament, challenging future generations to reconsider assumptions about slavery, loyalty, and social justice. It forced contemporaries to recognize that virtue, intelligence, and fidelity could exist outside the dominant race and class structures. Historians and scholars would later view this act as a remarkable anomaly, one that revealed both the limitations of social constructs and the possibility of moral courage in action. By rewarding the slave, the plantation owner created a narrative that could inspire reflection, debate, and ultimately, a reassessment of human values within a rigidly hierarchical society. Finally, the story of loyalty rewarded is inseparable from the broader ethical dimension of the narrative. It illustrates that recognition is not merely an acknowledgement of service but a deliberate act of justice. The plantation owner's decision reflects a nuanced understanding of human worth, that those who serve with integrity deserve more than acknowledgement. They deserve empowerment. By granting his entire estate to the slave, he transformed loyalty into liberation, action into legacy, and virtue into material reality. It is a lesson that transcends time, offering insight into the power of ethical decision-making in a world where injustice was assumed to be permanent. In conclusion, Keynote 3 highlights how loyalty, when recognized and rewarded, can disrupt societal norms, empower the oppressed, and leave an enduring historical legacy. The plantation owner's unprecedented bequest demonstrates that fidelity, intelligence, and moral courage are qualities worth honoring, even when society is structured to deny their value. By elevating a loyal slave above entitlement and privilege, he created a story of ethical recognition that continues to resonate, illustrating the profound impact of loyalty rewarded in a world built on injustice and assumption. The announcement of the plantation owner's will, leaving his entire estate to his trusted slave and excluding his wife, sent shockwaves far beyond the walls of the household. While the act was extraordinary in its recognition of loyalty and merit, it immediately provoked a fierce social backlash. In a society rigidly structured by race, class, and hierarchy, the elevation of a black man above white family members was not just controversial, it was perceived as a moral affront, a direct challenge to the social order that had governed every aspect of life for generations. The response of the local community reveals the pervasive prejudice, the fragility of social norms, and the resistance to acknowledging justice where it subverted entrenched hierarchies. From the moment the will was publicly read, neighbors, friends, and business associates reacted with disbelief, gossip, and indignation. The news spread rapidly across the county, reaching both plantation and town alike. As whispers and rumors turned into heated discussions, many could not comprehend how a man who had been legally enslaved, whose entire life had been confined to the roles imposed upon him by law and custom, could suddenly be the owner of vast wealth, property, and social influence. To the local white elite, this inheritance represented an existential threat to the assumptions that had long underpinned their society. The unquestioned supremacy of white property owners and the predetermined subordination of black people. The social backlash manifested in multiple forms. At formal gatherings and church meetings, the topic of the inheritance became unavoidable, discussed with a mixture of shock and moral outrage. Some members of the community criticized the plantation owner's judgment, framing the bequest as irrational, sinful, or influenced by inappropriate motives. Others openly questioned the legitimacy of the will, asserting that it must be challenged in court. Gossip painted the slave as opportunistic, sly, or manipulative, as the community struggled to reconcile the idea of a black man with wealth and authority. The backlash was not merely a response to personal affront. It reflected the fear of a social upheaval in which long-established hierarchies could be disrupted by merit rather than birthright. The wife and family, already aggrieved by their disinheritance, leveraged the prevailing social prejudices to strengthen their case. They appealed to neighbors, local leaders, and clergy, highlighting the perceived absurdity and injustice of the will. Their arguments relied on societal norms that had long gone unchallenged, that inheritance, status, and social power were natural rights of white family members. By framing the slave's inheritance as unnatural and improper, they tapped into the anxieties of a community unprepared to accept such an inversion of social order. The backlash, therefore, became a tool for amplifying both anger and potential legal challenges. At the same time, this social opposition placed the newly empowered slave in a precarious position. While the will granted him property and legal authority, he faced constant scrutiny and subtle hostility. Workers, tenants, and even local merchants were initially hesitant to accept his authority, conditioned as they were to a society where black people were expected to be subservient. Every decision he made would be interpreted through the lens of racial bias, with any mistake magnified and any display of competence questioned. The social backlash thus represented both a personal and practical challenge, testing not only his ability to manage the estate but also his resilience and diplomacy in navigating a hostile community. The backlash also illuminated the broader societal implications of the plantation owner's decision. By elevating a slave above white heirs, he challenged the very foundations of racial and social hierarchy. Communities were forced to confront uncomfortable questions. Could loyalty and intelligence be rewarded regardless of race? Could a black man legitimately wield wealth and authority in a society that denied him citizenship, autonomy, and legal equality? The outrage and resistance revealed the fragility of social norms and the deep-seated prejudice that had long gone unquestioned. In this context, the backlash was not merely emotional. It was a measure of how far society had to evolve to acknowledge justice and merit in unconventional forms. Interestingly, the social backlash also generated pockets of quiet admiration and support. Some neighbors, particularly those who had observed the slave's intelligence, dedication, and moral character firsthand, recognized the fairness of the plantation owner's decision. These observers quietly acknowledged that the reward of loyalty transcended race, viewing the inheritance as a rare act of ethical justice in an otherwise inequitable world. This duality, the coexistence of prejudice and admiration, highlights the tension between social expectation and moral reasoning, a tension that would continue to play out in courtrooms, local politics, and family dynamics. The press and legal authorities of the time also contributed to the intensity of the backlash. Newspapers and town records reported on the controversy, framing it as both scandalous and extraordinary. Public opinion, shaped by these reports, was divided. Some condemned the plantation owner's choice as a violation of natural law, while others marveled at the recognition of loyalty and virtue. These public narratives amplified the social consequences of the inheritance, ensuring that the backlash was not confined to private gatherings, but extended across the broader regional consciousness. Despite the hostility, the backlash ultimately reinforced the significance of the master's decision. The more society resisted, the more remarkable the act appeared. By standing firm in his choice, the plantation owner not only ensured that loyalty was rewarded, but also created a historical lesson in moral courage and justice. The social backlash, in essence, magnified the ethical and cultural impact of the inheritance, demonstrating that recognition of virtue, even in defiance of societal norms, could resonate far beyond the immediate estate. Finally, the social backlash underscores the complexity of human reaction to justice that challenges convention. It reveals the intertwined dynamics of fear, prejudice, entitlement, and admiration, and illustrates the societal resistance that often accompanies transformative acts. The plantation owner's decision, though controversial, forced both his family and his community to reckon with their assumptions about race, class, and morality. By rewarding loyalty and merit over entitlement, he created a ripple effect that would challenge social norms, provoke debate, and inspire reflection for generations. In conclusion, Keynote 4 demonstrates that acts of ethical recognition, particularly those that defy societal expectations, are often met with resistance, outrage, and prejudice. The social backlash experienced by the slave, his family, and the local community highlights the fragility of hierarchical norms and the courage required to challenge them. By standing firm in his decision, the plantation owner not only rewarded loyalty, but also exposed the moral limitations of a society structured around entitlement and racial hierarchy. The story remains a powerful testament to the tension between justice and prejudice, loyalty and greed, and the enduring impact of choices that defy convention. The plantation owner's decision to leave his entire estate to a slave was not merely an emotional or moral choice. It represented a seismic shift in the dynamics of wealth, power, and societal expectation in the antebellum South. In a world where property, land, and financial security were almost exclusively the domain of white families, the transfer of wealth to someone legally considered property was unprecedented. This key moment illuminates not only the mechanics of inheritance, but also the broader implications of distributing wealth based on merit, loyalty, and ethical reasoning, rather than the arbitrary conventions of birthright and privilege. In the early 1800s, plantation wealth was the backbone of Southern society. Estates were meticulously managed and carefully preserved across generations, ensuring that family status and influence remained intact. Land ownership determined political power, social prestige, and economic stability. and it was typically reserved for white males or, in some cases, their wives as secondary beneficiaries. The legal framework reinforced these norms, making any deviation from the expected line of inheritance difficult if not impossible to justify. Yet the plantation owner, observing both the limitations and injustices of such a system, decided to challenge these conventions in a way that was both deliberate and irrevocable. The transfer of wealth to the slave disrupted established assumptions about social hierarchy. Ownership of property conferred not just financial advantage, but authority over others, including workers, tenants, and even neighboring landowners. By elevating the slave to the position of master of the estate, the plantation owner effectively subverted the rigid racial and class-based structures that defined the community. This act demonstrated a profound understanding of both the power dynamics of wealth and the ethical imperative to reward merit over entitlement. In doing so, he created a scenario that forced society to reconsider its assumptions about who could legitimately possess power, manage property, and influence local affairs. The mechanics of the transfer were carefully structured to withstand scrutiny. The plantation owner ensured that the will was legally sound, anticipating the predictable challenges from family and community members who were outraged by this unprecedented decision. Every clause, every specification, and every signature was executed with the foresight of a man who understood the intersection of law, morality, and societal resistance. By crafting a watertight legal framework, he ensured that the transfer of wealth would be recognized not as a temporary anomaly, but as a legitimate and enforceable act, setting a rare historical precedent for merit-based inheritance. The dynamics of wealth transfer also highlighted the stark contrast between the principles of entitlement and merit. The wife and relatives had operated under the assumption that inheritance was a birthright, guaranteed by social and familial status. Their anger and disbelief reveal how deeply ingrained these expectations were. In contrast, the slave's inheritance was entirely earned through years of demonstrated loyalty, competence, and ethical judgment. This contrast underscores the radical nature of the wealth transfer. It was a deliberate repudiation of privilege, favoring merit and virtue over societal expectation. In a sense, the plantation owner rewrote the rules of inheritance, placing ethical conduct above rigid social norms. Beyond the immediate family and community, this transfer of wealth had practical implications. The beneficiary, formerly a slave, suddenly became responsible for managing vast assets, supervising workers, and making strategic decisions that would impact the plantation's continued prosperity. This responsibility required not only skill and intelligence, but also courage, as the new owner had to navigate social hostility, racial prejudice, and legal scrutiny. The wealth itself, while a reward, also represented a test of character, requiring the same prudence and ethical judgment that had earned it. In this way, the transfer was both a reward and a challenge, transforming material inheritance into a vehicle for empowerment and personal growth. The broader societal implications of this act cannot be overstated. By transferring wealth to a slave, the plantation owner challenged the economic foundations of the local elite. It demonstrated that wealth need not be preserved solely for those born into privilege, and it posed a moral question to the community. Should social structures be guided by inherited status, or should they recognize intelligence, loyalty, and virtue, even in those historically denied recognition? The decision forced neighbors, peers, and legal authorities to confront a reality that was uncomfortable, provocative, and unprecedented, reshaping perceptions of fairness and justice in the process. The transfer also symbolized a form of liberation within the constraints of an oppressive system. While legal freedom had been denied to slaves in countless regions, the act of inheriting property conferred both material security and social leverage. It enabled the slave to exercise autonomy, command respect, and assert authority within a society that had systematically denied him these rights. This redistribution of wealth was therefore more than a personal reward. It was a transformative social statement, a practical mechanism for challenging injustice, and a historical lesson in the power of ethical decision-making. Additionally, the wealth transfer provided a model for reconsidering the role of morality in property inheritance. It revealed that justice could, at times, transcend societal norms. rewarding those who demonstrated ethical integrity rather than merely adhering to inherited privilege. The plantation owner's foresight in rewarding loyalty created a precedent that emphasized merit, virtue, and service over rigid social constructs. In doing so, he demonstrated that wealth, while inherently a material measure, could also be a moral instrument, capable of reshaping lives and influencing society in profound ways. Finally, the wealth transfer illuminates the enduring tension between societal expectation and individual judgment. The plantation owner exercised autonomy, ethical reasoning, and foresight to challenge conventional norms, rewarding loyalty and virtue despite widespread social prejudice. The act was both revolutionary and cautionary. Revolutionary in its recognition of merit and courage, cautionary in its exposure of societal rigidity and resistance to change. The redistribution of wealth became a defining moment, ensuring that history would remember not only the financial transaction but the moral principle at its core. In conclusion, Keynote 5 emphasizes how wealth transfer dynamics can serve as a vehicle for justice, recognition, and societal disruption. By granting his estate to a loyal slave rather than entitled family members, the plantation owner demonstrated that merit and virtue can, in rare circumstances, override the entrenched hierarchies of race, class, and birthright. The act challenged social norms, redefined inheritance, and offered a timeless lesson on the ethical use of wealth to reward loyalty, integrity, and courage. The ripple effects of this extraordinary decision extended far beyond the immediate estate, shaping perceptions of justice, morality, and human potential in a deeply stratified society. The extraordinary decision of the plantation owner to bequeath his entire estate to his loyal slave and disinherit his wife and relatives inevitably sparked intense legal scrutiny. In a society governed by strict racial hierarchies and defined inheritance laws, the idea of a black man inheriting vast wealth and property was unprecedented and controversial. This decision triggered lawsuits, court hearings, and relentless social pressure as the family and community grappled with the shock and sought to overturn what they perceived as an injustice. The ensuing legal battles became a central element of the story, highlighting both the rigidity of societal norms and the extraordinary courage of the plantation owner in safeguarding his final wishes. Almost immediately after the will was read, the disinherited wife mobilized legal counsel to contest the bequest. She relied on the presumption that inheritance rights were automatically conferred upon her as the spouse, leveraging both marital law and societal expectations to argue that the will was unfair, irrational, or invalid. Her argument was reinforced by the racial biases of the era, which denied the legitimacy of a slave as an heir. By framing the inheritance as legally untenable, she attempted to harness both precedent and prejudice to reclaim the estate that had been denied to her. Her legal challenge became a test not only of the law but of deeply entrenched social structures that sought to maintain white dominance over wealth and property. Extended family members joined in the legal battles, each motivated by a combination of greed and perceived entitlement. Sons, nephews, and other relatives argued that the plantation owner had violated natural expectations by elevating a black man above them. They cited legal technicalities, questioned the master's mental state at the time of drafting the will, and attempted to appeal to the court's interpretation of moral propriety. These challenges created a tense and highly publicized legal environment, where community opinion, social norms, and racial prejudice all played crucial roles. Lawyers debated the will's legitimacy, historical context, and the morality of the bequest, reflecting a society grappling with an ethical dilemma far beyond the ordinary scope of inheritance disputes. The beneficiary, the loyal slave, was thrust into a position that required both legal and social navigation. Though the will was meticulously drafted, ensuring its enforceability, the inherited wealth came with the responsibility of defending his rights in a hostile environment. He had to rely on competent legal representation, prepare for court hearings, and demonstrate his ability to manage the estate effectively. Every action was scrutinized, and the slightest misstep could be interpreted as incompetence or manipulation. The legal battles thus underscored the vulnerability inherent in the inheritance, even when it was supported by clear documentation. The slave's success in navigating these challenges reflected both his intelligence and the plantation owner's foresight in structuring the will to withstand opposition. Community pressure compounded the legal tension, Local neighbors, merchants, and officials often aligned with the disinherited family, either openly or subtly influencing court opinions. Social ostracism, whispered threats, and public criticism created an environment in which the legal process was inseparable from societal influence. Courts of the time, while theoretically impartial, were embedded within communities that held entrenched views on race, hierarchy, and social propriety. The battles over the will were therefore as much about social negotiation and perception as they were about law. The plantation owners' careful legal planning anticipated these pressures, ensuring that justice could prevail even in a biased environment. The legal intricacies of the case also reveal the broader societal limitations on race and property. Laws governing inheritance, ownership, and the rights of enslaved people were designed to maintain white dominance. The plantation owner's decision to bypass these conventions challenged not only his family, but the very legal framework of the region. By leaving the estate to a slave, he confronted societal assumptions codified into law and forced legal authorities to wrestle with a scenario for which there was no established precedent. Judges, lawyers, and clerks were compelled to navigate an ethical gray area, a clear testament of the master's wishes versus decades of systemic bias against black property ownership. The case therefore became both a legal anomaly and a moral test. As the legal proceedings unfolded, they highlighted the tension between written law and ethical intent. While society and precedent favored the family, the clarity and intentionality of the master's will provided a strong defense. Legal experts analyzed the language of the document, the soundness of its execution, and the intentions behind each clause. The careful drafting, witnesses, and notarization served as a bulwark against manipulation or reinterpretation. This foresight was critical in ensuring that the reward of loyalty and virtue, the cornerstone of the inheritance, was preserved despite social opposition and familial greed. The legal battles also had broader implications beyond the immediate parties. They became a public spectacle, reported and discussed in local communities and, in some cases, documented in regional records. Observers debated morality, racial dynamics, and property rights, reflecting on what justice should look like in a society built on systemic oppression. The case served as a rare instance in which ethical reasoning, loyalty, and human merit were defended through legal mechanisms against entrenched social prejudice. It became an enduring example of how deliberate legal planning can enforce moral decisions, even in hostile social contexts. Ultimately, the legal battles affirmed the plantation owner's vision. Despite the fervent opposition of his wife, relatives, and many neighbors, the structure and clarity of the will ensured that the inheritance remained with the loyal slave. The courts recognized the validity of the document, and its provisions were executed as intended. The resolution demonstrated that ethical foresight, careful planning, and respect for merit could prevail even in a society predisposed to inequality. The legal challenges, rather than undermining the act, highlighted the extraordinary courage and deliberation behind it, reinforcing the moral and historical significance of the inheritance. In conclusion, Keynote 6 illustrates how legal battles and societal pressure can shape, test, and ultimately validate acts of justice that challenge convention. The fight to overturn the will reveals human greed, entitlement, and racial prejudice, while simultaneously emphasizing the importance of foresight, ethical reasoning, and legal precision. By ensuring that the loyal slave's inheritance was defended and upheld, the plantation owner not only rewarded loyalty but also created a lasting historical precedent. The story demonstrates that justice, when combined with careful planning, can withstand social opposition and leave an enduring legacy of fairness, courage, and recognition for virtue. The inheritance of a vast plantation by a former slave marked not only a transfer of material wealth but also a profound transformation in social status. In the antebellum South, a black person inheriting property and wealth was virtually unthinkable. The rigid societal hierarchy had long denied freedom, autonomy, and recognition to those of African descent. By elevating his loyal slave to the position of estate owner, the plantation owner disrupted centuries of social and racial norms, creating a scenario that would test the new owner's ability to navigate authority, influence, and societal scrutiny. This transformation was as much psychological and social as it was legal or financial. reshaping the very identity of the individual and his place in the community. The first dimension of this transformation was the dramatic shift in responsibility. Previously, the slave's life had been defined by obedience, labor, and the enforcement of someone else's will. His days were dictated by the needs of the plantation, seasonal demands, and the expectations of his master. His knowledge, intelligence, and moral judgment, while critical to the functioning of the estate, had gone largely unrecognized in the broader social framework. With the inheritance, he was thrust into a position where his decisions now carried the weight of ownership, management, and authority. Crops, livestock, workers, financial accounts, and the welfare of tenants were suddenly his responsibility, a dramatic shift from the subservience he had known. The transition required both practical skill and psychological resilience, as the responsibilities were immense and the scrutiny intense. Simultaneously, the transformation of status challenged societal perceptions. White neighbors, local merchants, and even regional authorities had to reconcile the existence of a black estate owner with their long-held assumptions about race and social hierarchy. Many reacted with disbelief, hostility, or resentment, unwilling to accept that someone they had long considered subordinate could wield power, control resources, and influence the local economy. This tension created a precarious social environment in which the new owner had to assert authority without provoking outright rebellion, balancing firmness with diplomacy to maintain control and legitimacy. The shift in social status also brought internal challenges. The former slave had to reconcile his identity, moving from the socially imposed role of laborer to that of a property owner with authority over former peers and even over white employees in certain contexts. This required not only confidence and leadership, but also a nuanced understanding of human behavior, power dynamics, and societal prejudice. Navigating these dynamics successfully would determine whether his inheritance would translate into lasting influence or become a source of conflict and instability. The transformation was therefore both empowering and demanding, requiring skill, patience, and courage. The psychological impact of this transformation was equally profound. The elevation from enslavement to wealth and authority reshaped the individual's perception of self and his understanding of potential. For decades, societal structures had communicated that he was property, incapable of ownership, intelligence, or moral decision-making. The inheritance shattered this imposed limitation, providing tangible proof of his worth, competence, and ethical character. The newfound autonomy affirmed his value not merely in material terms but in human terms, validating a lifetime of loyalty, prudence, and moral conduct. However, with this empowerment came the inevitability of scrutiny. Every decision, from financial management to labor allocation, would be observed, judged, and often criticized through the lens of racial prejudice. Neighbors, former peers, and even legal authorities were alert for mistakes, expecting failure as confirmation of their long-held assumptions. This heightened pressure demanded that the new owner operate with exceptional prudence, strategy, and ethical clarity. It was a trial not just of competence but of character, testing whether the moral virtues that had earned him recognition could withstand the challenges of power, responsibility, and social hostility. The transformation of status also had broader symbolic implications. It challenged the fundamental assumptions underpinning the social hierarchy of the South, demonstrating that merit, loyalty, and moral integrity could, at least in rare circumstances, triumph over entrenched privilege and racial discrimination. The community was forced to confront the reality that social position was not an infallible indicator of capability, and that virtues such as loyalty, intelligence, and ethical conduct deserved recognition regardless of race. The story thus became more than an individual narrative. It evolved into a symbolic testament to justice, moral courage, and the potential for societal disruption through ethical action. Economically, the inheritance ensured a degree of independence and sustainability that had been unimaginable for a former slave. Land, livestock, and financial resources provided the means to maintain the estate, support dependents, and influence local commerce. Wealth conferred not just comfort but autonomy, allowing the beneficiary to make decisions that affected his community and future generations. This shift from economic subordination to authority reinforced the profound nature of the transformation. The reward of loyalty was both symbolic and material, reshaping every aspect of the individual's life. The social transformation extended to relationships with other members of the community. Former peers, workers, and even some family members had to adjust their perception and interactions, learning to accept his authority and respect his decisions. While some resisted, others adapted, acknowledging his competence and the legitimacy of his position. These evolving relationships further illustrate the complexities of social change, highlighting both resistance and acceptance as integral aspects of status transformation in a racially stratified society. Ultimately, Keynote 7 demonstrates that the inheritance was not merely an act of wealth transfer, but a profound transformation of identity, authority, and societal perception. By elevating his loyal slave to the role of estate owner, the plantation master challenged social norms, rewarded merit, and created a historical narrative of empowerment against systemic oppression. The transformation encompassed responsibility, psychological adjustment, social negotiation, and symbolic significance, revealing the intricate interplay between wealth, status, and virtue in a society designed to deny both to those outside the dominant class. In conclusion, the story of transformation from slave to estate owner underscores the extraordinary courage of both the plantation owner and his loyal beneficiary. It reveals the practical, psychological, and societal challenges of navigating unprecedented status, while highlighting the enduring lesson that loyalty, virtue, and intelligence can transcend entrenched social hierarchies. Keynote 7 illustrates the full scope of the inheritance's impact, showing that wealth alone does not define transformation. Authority, recognition, and moral validation are equally essential in reshaping lives and challenging history. The inheritance of the plantation by a loyal slave did not merely change his personal circumstances, it had far-reaching implications for the broader community, setting a precedent that resonated across social, economic, and cultural lines. Legacy is rarely established by wealth alone. It is created through the actions, decisions, and moral principles that endure beyond a single lifetime. In this story, the plantation owner's choice to reward loyalty rather than privilege created a transformative legacy that extended well beyond his immediate estate, influencing perceptions of justice, social responsibility, and ethical governance. From the moment the inheritance took effect, the new owner's influence began to ripple through the community. Previously, local decisions regarding labor management, crop distribution, and land use had been dominated by white landowners who conformed to traditional hierarchies. The elevation of a black man to property ownership challenged these dynamics, demonstrating that authority and responsibility could be earned through merit rather than inherited by birth. This shift compelled neighbors, tenants, and even local officials to adjust their expectations and interactions, gradually reshaping the social fabric of the region. The new owner's decisions carried weight, and his approach to managing the estate served as a model for fairness, prudence, and ethical leadership. The legacy also extended to cultural perceptions of morality and justice. By publicly rewarding loyalty and merit over entitlement and greed, the plantation owner challenged long-held societal assumptions. The community, initially shocked and resistant, was forced to confront the ethical question: could virtue, intelligence, and dedication override race and social hierarchy? This moment became a moral lesson, illustrating that justice does not always align with tradition and that true recognition often requires courage to defy conventional expectations. In doing so, the story of the inheritance became a touchstone for discussions about fairness, loyalty, and ethical action in a deeply unequal society. Economic influence was another critical aspect of the legacy. The inherited estate encompassed not only land and crops, but also the labor, resources, and infrastructure necessary to sustain and expand wealth. The new owner's management decisions affected the livelihoods of workers, tenants, and surrounding plantations. His approach, guided by the principles that had earned him recognition, emphasized fairness, efficiency, and responsibility. This redistribution of influence demonstrated that wealth and property, when managed ethically, could empower not just the individual but an entire community. Unlike the previous system, which concentrated power in the hands of the privileged few, this transformation allowed for more equitable and merit-based stewardship. The legacy further manifested in the perception of leadership and authority. Observers noted that the new owner's competence, ethical conduct, and strategic thinking reinforced his legitimacy, challenging stereotypes about race, intelligence, and capacity for governance. By successfully navigating societal prejudice and managing the estate effectively, he established a precedent that competence and morality could outweigh inherited status. This demonstration had subtle yet powerful implications for other enslaved and oppressed individuals, offering hope that recognition and influence could, in exceptional circumstances, transcend societal barriers. Social networks and alliances also became part of the enduring influence. The new owner cultivated relationships with workers, neighbors, and sympathetic members of the community, building a network based on trust, respect, and mutual benefit. These alliances were essential not only for practical estate management, but also for consolidating social legitimacy in an environment initially hostile to a black landowner. The ability to navigate these relationships demonstrated political acumen and ethical foresight, further solidifying the transformative impact of the inheritance. Over time, these alliances contributed to the reshaping of community dynamics, illustrating the power of moral leadership to influence social structures. The legacy of the inheritance also extended to legal and historical precedent. By successfully transferring property to a black individual in a society unaccustomed to such occurrences, the plantation owner created a documented instance of ethical inheritance that could be cited in legal, historical, and moral discourse. Scholars, historians, and legal commentators later reflected on the case as an extraordinary example of foresight, justice, and recognition of human virtue. It served as a counter-narrative to the prevailing stories of oppression, demonstrating that acts of ethical courage could have lasting societal resonance, challenging assumptions and inspiring reflection across generations. Educational influence was another dimension of the legacy. The new owner's approach to managing the estate, mentoring workers, and exercising leadership provided a practical model for ethical governance. Observers, both white and black, learned from his decisions, understanding that authority could be exercised responsibly and fairly. The story highlighted the value of experience, intelligence, and moral integrity in leadership, offering lessons that extended beyond the plantation into broader societal contexts. The inheritance thus became a catalyst for informal education, reshaping perceptions of competence, morality, and social responsibility. Psychologically, the legacy reinforced the idea that virtue and loyalty could produce tangible outcomes, even in hostile or unequal environments. For the beneficiary, the inheritance validated a lifetime of ethical behavior, providing affirmation and empowerment. For the wider community, it offered a lesson in humility, reflection, and the potential for societal transformation when individuals act with foresight and integrity. The interplay between individual achievement and communal perception underlined the interconnectedness of morality, social acceptance, and long-term influence. Finally, the story of the inheritance ensured that the plantation owner's values endured beyond his death. By deliberately structuring the bequest to reward loyalty and merit, he created a moral and historical blueprint for ethical decision-making. His actions demonstrated that wealth, authority, and recognition could be tools for justice rather than instruments of entitlement and oppression. The enduring influence of this decision highlights the potential for individuals to shape not only personal legacies but also societal norms, challenging entrenched hierarchies and inspiring reflection across time. In conclusion, Keynote 8 emphasizes that legacy extends far beyond wealth. It encompasses influence, ethical leadership, and the reshaping of social and cultural norms. The plantation owner's decision to reward a loyal slave created a transformative ripple effect, influencing economic, social, legal, and moral structures in his community. The inheritance demonstrated that ethical recognition, when combined with foresight and courage, can produce lasting impact, challenging prejudice, redefining leadership, and leaving a historical imprint that transcends the immediate circumstances of the estate. Keynote 8 highlights the profound ways in which a single act of justice can shape society, inspire moral reflection, and create enduring influence for generations to come. The plantation owner's decision to bequeath his estate to a loyal slave was remarkable not only because of the transfer of wealth, but also because it required careful preparation to ensure the beneficiary could manage the responsibilities effectively in an era where formal education for Black individuals was systematically denied. The owner's foresight in mentoring, training, and guiding his slave became a crucial factor in the successful transition of authority. This key aspect highlights the importance of knowledge, preparation, and skill development in empowering those historically marginalized, allowing them to navigate complex social, economic, and legal landscapes. For decades, the slave had been intimately involved in the daily operations of the plantation, from overseeing agricultural cycles to managing laborers, maintaining records, and negotiating with suppliers. He had accumulated practical knowledge essential for estate management. Yet this knowledge was typically considered part of servitude, rather than a foundation for autonomy. The plantation owner, recognizing both the slave's aptitude and the inherent injustice of restricting access to formal learning, took deliberate steps to provide mentorship that would prepare him for eventual ownership. This mentorship extended beyond the mechanics of plantation management to include principles of financial planning, ethical decision-making, and social negotiation, skills that were critical for maintaining authority in a racially prejudiced society. Education in this context was holistic. While literacy and numeracy were taught where possible, the more critical lessons involved strategic thinking, leadership, and diplomacy. The slave was trained to anticipate challenges, resolve conflicts, and assert authority in ways that commanded respect, while minimizing social friction, understanding human behavior, navigating complex relationships among workers, tenants, and neighbors, and executing decisions with both fairness and firmness were essential competencies. The owner's guidance emphasized not only technical skill but also moral judgment, reinforcing that ethical stewardship was as important as practical efficiency in sustaining the estate. Mentorship also involved the careful cultivation of confidence and self-perception. Living in a society that systematically denied agency to Black individuals, the slave had internalized many of the limitations imposed upon him. The plantation owner's role as mentor was to instill a sense of legitimacy and empowerment, teaching him to recognize his own competence and authority. By nurturing both skill and self-belief, the owner ensured that the transition from servitude to ownership would be psychologically sustainable, allowing the new estate owner to assert himself confidently in a hostile environment. The mentorship extended to legal knowledge, an essential but often overlooked aspect of estate management. Understanding property law, contractual obligations, and the formalities of inheritance enabled the slave to defend his rights, manage disputes, and maintain the legitimacy of his authority. The owner's guidance in these areas was critical, as the beneficiary would inevitably face challenges from family members, neighbors, and others resistant to the notion of a Black estate owner. Knowledge became a form of empowerment, allowing the slave to navigate complex legal terrain with skill, safeguarding both his property and his social position. Education and mentorship also encompassed financial literacy. The plantation owner ensured that the beneficiary understood the principles of investment, resource allocation, and long-term planning. The management of crops, labor, and profits required strategic decision-making to sustain the estate across seasons and generations. By imparting financial knowledge, the owner equipped the slave to convert inherited resources into enduring wealth, transforming the bequest from a one-time reward into a sustainable foundation for influence and legacy. This proactive preparation minimized risk, reduced dependence on others, and reinforced the connection between competence and empowerment. The mentorship process had profound social implications as well. The new owner would inevitably confront skepticism, prejudice, and resistance from the community. By preparing him to navigate these dynamics with tact, intelligence, and ethical clarity, the plantation owner ensured that he could assert authority without exacerbating social tensions. Education in diplomacy and leadership became as essential as technical skills, demonstrating that knowledge, wisdom, and strategy were vital in overcoming societal barriers and securing respect in a racially stratified environment. This deliberate preparation reflects the broader significance of mentorship in creating lasting change. It underscores that empowerment is not solely about granting rights or wealth. It also requires the transfer of knowledge, the cultivation of judgment, and the development of skills necessary for responsible autonomy. The plantation owner's investment in education and mentorship ensured that the inheritance would not falter due to lack of preparation, but instead serve as a model of ethical, competent, and transformative leadership. Mentorship also reinforced the ethical dimension of the inheritance. By guiding the slave in responsible estate management, the plantation owner emphasized that wealth and authority carried obligations, not merely privileges. The beneficiary was expected to uphold fairness, honor the welfare of workers, and make decisions that balanced profitability with justice. This approach ensured that the reward of loyalty translated into enduring ethical influence, preserving the moral integrity that had been the foundation of the bequest. The success of the mentorship was evident in the smooth transition of power. The former slave assumed control of the estate with confidence, competence, and strategic foresight. Workers respected his authority, tenants adhered to agreements, and the broader community, while initially skeptical, came to acknowledge his ability to manage both resources and relationships effectively. The careful preparation provided by the plantation owner was instrumental in transforming a potentially contentious inheritance into a lasting legacy of leadership, morality, and empowerment. Ultimately, Keynote 9 highlights that education and mentorship are essential mechanisms for translating opportunity into sustained impact. The plantation owner's foresight ensured that his ethical decision to reward loyalty with wealth and authority would have lasting consequences, not only for the individual beneficiary, but for the broader community. By investing in knowledge, skill development, and moral guidance, he created a foundation for enduring influence, demonstrating that empowerment requires both resources and preparation. In conclusion, the story of mentorship and education underscores the transformative power of guidance and skill building in overcoming systemic oppression. The plantation owner's deliberate preparation of his loyal slave ensured that the inheritance became more than a reward. It became a vehicle for ethical leadership, social influence, and lasting legacy. Keynote 9 illustrates that empowerment is not merely the granting of property or wealth. It requires foresight, education, and mentorship to enable individuals to navigate complex social, economic, and moral landscapes successfully. The story remains a timeless testament to the power of preparation in translating opportunity into enduring achievement and influence. The final keynote of this extraordinary story examines the enduring impact of the plantation owner's decision to leave his estate to his loyal slave. While the preceding keynotes explored personal transformation, social backlash, legal battles, and mentorship, Keynote 10 focuses on the broader historical significance of this act and the lessons it imparts for future generations. This inheritance was more than a transfer of property. It became a symbol of justice, courage, and the transformative power of ethical decision-making in a society defined by inequality, oppression, and entrenched hierarchies. The historical significance of this act is multifaceted. In a period when slavery was legally sanctioned and black individuals were denied autonomy and property rights, the elevation of a slave to the status of landowner represented a radical deviation from societal norms. It challenged the assumption that wealth and authority were inherently tied to race, birth, and privilege. The plantation owner's decision demonstrated that merit, loyalty, and ethical character could transcend deeply embedded social barriers. This radical act forced communities, historians, and later scholars to reconsider the limitations of social structures and the potential for individual agency to redefine historical trajectories. The story also serves as a historical document of moral courage. The plantation owner's choice to reward loyalty over entitlement was made despite anticipating the backlash, legal challenges, and social ostracism that would inevitably follow. This foresight underscores a critical lesson. Meaningful change often requires defiance of convention, even when such defiance invites criticism or opposition. By standing firm in his ethical conviction, the owner provided a model of leadership grounded not in societal expectation, but in moral principle. This aspect of the story resonates across generations, emphasizing that courage in ethical decision-making can create ripples that extend far beyond immediate circumstances. The impact on the beneficiary, the former slave, is equally profound. The inheritance transformed his life from one of subjugation and limited opportunity to one of authority, wealth, and social recognition. His ability to manage the estate, navigate societal prejudice, and exercise leadership provided a tangible demonstration of capability, challenging prevailing stereotypes and prejudices. The historical record of his success provides evidence that when given opportunity, support, and preparation, individuals who have been historically marginalized can achieve remarkable influence and lasting legacy. This lesson remains relevant across time, highlighting the importance of access, mentorship, and empowerment in enabling human potential. The broader societal implications are equally significant. By defying conventional inheritance norms, the plantation owner's decision prompted discussions about justice, fairness, and social responsibility within his community. Neighbors, legal authorities, and family members were forced to confront assumptions about entitlement, merit, and the role of virtue in determining outcomes. The story thus became a touchstone for broader debates about equality, moral obligation, and the potential for societal transformation when ethical principles are prioritized over tradition. In this way, the act served as both a catalyst and a symbol, illustrating how individual decisions can resonate through social consciousness and challenge established hierarchies. One of the most enduring lessons of this story is the interplay between wealth, responsibility, and moral integrity. The inheritance was not simply a reward, it carried obligations, expectations, and the challenge of managing social dynamics, economic resources, and human relationships. The plantation owner's foresight in mentoring the beneficiary ensured that wealth would be paired with competence and ethical leadership. This connection between material resources and moral responsibility underscores the idea that true legacy is not measured by possession alone, but by the values, skills, and ethical influence that accompany it. The legal ramifications of the inheritance also contribute to its historical significance. By successfully structuring a will that withstood challenges from entitled family members and societal prejudice, the plantation owner created a documented precedent of merit-based inheritance. This legal success demonstrates the importance of foresight, precision, and ethical intention in shaping outcomes that challenge societal norms. The story offers a rare glimpse into how the law can be used not merely as a mechanism of control, but as a tool to enforce justice, reward virtue, and safeguard ethical decisions in the face of entrenched opposition. Culturally, the inheritance serves as a reminder of the transformative power of recognition. By acknowledging the slave's loyalty, skill, and moral character, the plantation owner validated human dignity in a society that systematically denied it. This act of recognition was revolutionary in its context, demonstrating that human worth is not determined solely by race, status, or birthright. The cultural resonance of the story persists because it illustrates that ethical choices can disrupt ingrained prejudices, inspire reflection, and create a historical narrative of empowerment against systemic injustice. The story also imparts lessons for leadership across contexts. The plantation owner exemplified foresight, strategic planning, and ethical courage. He recognized talent, invested in mentorship, and crafted a legal framework to protect his ethical vision. Leaders today can draw inspiration from this example, understanding that meaningful leadership often involves anticipating challenges, nurturing potential, and making decisions guided by principle rather than convenience or societal expectation. The narrative illustrates that the impact of leadership extends far beyond immediate outcomes, shaping both community dynamics and historical memory. From a historical perspective, the inheritance provides an invaluable case study in resilience, adaptability, and empowerment. The beneficiary's ability to navigate social hostility, assert authority, and manage resources demonstrates the potential of individuals to overcome systemic oppression when provided with opportunity, guidance, and recognition. This story contributes to a more nuanced understanding of antebellum society, highlighting the capacity for ethical action and personal agency within a framework that was overwhelmingly structured to suppress both. Finally, the enduring impact of this story lies in its moral and educational value. It serves as a narrative that teaches the importance of justice, loyalty, mentorship, and courage in shaping human outcomes. It reminds future generations that acts of ethical foresight can produce lasting influence, and that challenging convention in pursuit of justice can redefine social norms, empower marginalized individuals, and create legacies that inspire long after the actors themselves are gone. The plantation owner's decision and the beneficiary's subsequent success together provide a timeless lesson that true greatness arises from the intersection of moral courage, foresight, and the recognition of human potential. In conclusion, Keynote 10 emphasizes the enduring historical significance of the plantation owner's decision by rewarding loyalty, empowering a marginalized individual, and creating a precedent for merit-based recognition. He left a legacy that transcends wealth and property. The story teaches lessons about courage, justice, mentorship, and the transformative power of ethical leadership. It highlights the potential for individuals to challenge entrenched systems, reshape societal expectations, and leave a lasting mark on history. Keynote 10 reinforces that true legacy is measured not merely in material inheritance, but in the ethical, social, and cultural impact of decisions that honor virtue, recognize potential, and inspire future generations.